Have you ever walked out of a perfectly polite, completely professional meeting and just felt entirely drained?
Mm.
Or maybe you've carried the weight of an unfinished conversation for years. You know that feeling. You are staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, or you are gripping the steering wheel in traffic, replaying what you should have said to your boss or your partner.
We all do it.
Right. And if you are nodding along right now, you are really going to want to settle in, because today's deep dive is incredibly relevant to you. We are looking at the 2026 book, A Ode to the Clarity, The Architecture of Conversational Mastery by Jedediah Alex Coe.
It is a fantastic piece of work.
It really is. And our mission today is to explore the hidden architecture of human exchange. We are moving way past those, rigid corporate communication frameworks to discover how conversations actually transform us on a physical and emotional level. Okay, let's unpack this.
It is a vital topic to explore because, generally speaking, we tend to think of conversations as just data transfers.
You like an email?
Exactly. It is a very mechanical view. I have a piece of information in my brain, I vibrate my vocal cords, and now that information is in your brain. But the source material lays out a much more profound reality. Conversations are not neutral. They possess what the author calls a gravitational consequence.
Gravitational consequence. That makes it sound like a conversation actually bends the reality around it.
That is exactly the right way to think about it. Conversations warp the relational space around them. Every single exchange you have leaves a residue. It leaves a physical and emotional sediment that alters your internal composition. What's fascinating here is that we rarely notice this conversational sediment accumulating.
Because it's invisible.
Exactly. We just walk away from our daily encounters as slightly different chemical compounds than we entered them, often without understanding why we suddenly feel exhausted or defensive or inspired.
That invisible sediment builds up so incredibly fast, doesn't it? And the book suggests a lot of this buildup happens because of what it calls the mask of knowing.
Ah,
We are just so terrified of silence or of looking uninformed in front of our peers that we fill the air with absolute certainties.
yes, it is a form of conversational mimicry. Admitting ignorance feels entirely too vulnerable in most professional settings.
Right. There is this fascinating story in the text that perfectly illustrates this. The author is facilitating a strategy session for a massive semiconductor company. They're in this beautiful boardroom in Taipei, and the room is just packed with brilliant, highly decorated engineers.
High-stakes environment.
Very high stakes. And the question put on the table by the facilitator is deceptively simple. It's, what do we not yet understand about our customers' emerging needs?
A brilliant question, but a deeply uncomfortable one for a room full of experts.
Exactly. I was reading this and wincing because you can just feel the tension. After about 3 seconds of dead silence, the most senior engineer at the table just starts speaking confidently.
Of course.
And he goes on a 20-minute monologue about what they already knew. And then, instead of pulling it back to the actual question, the rest of the room just joins in.
They fall right in line.
Yeah. They entirely replaced the vulnerable, open question of what don't we know with a very safe, rehearsed performance of, well, look at what we do know.
It is a classic defensive maneuver. It perfectly illustrates face dynamics, which are deeply rooted in many cultures, but fundamentally universally driven by the fear of uncertainty.
Right.
To admit, I don't know in front of your peers or superiors feels like a dangerous loss of status. So the mask of knowing does its job smoothly. It protects everyone from the immediate discomfort of the unknown.
But there is a massive cost to that protection, isn't there?
A huge cost. You are essentially trading genuine, necessary discovery for a defensive theatrical performance. In that Taipei boardroom, they were never going to innovate as long as they were protecting their egos.
And it took someone with nothing to lose to break it.
Precisely. The book notes that it took a young engineer sitting at the far end of the table, someone with much less status, to lose shifting in his chair and quietly admitting, we actually don't know how our customers are changing. That single, terrifying admission of not knowing broke the spell. It shifted the entire room's energy from defense to actual exploration.
What blows my mind is how our physical bodies register all of this unspoken tension before our conscious minds even catch up.
Somatic inscription.
Yes, the book uses that term, somatic inscription. Can you break down what that actually means in this context?
Of course, soma refers to the body. Somatic inscription is the idea that the body literally keeps a physical record and inscription of our relational experiences. The body doesn't lie. It completely lacks the mind's sophistication for self-deception and rationalization.
So that makes the story of the Malaysian CEO so much more intense. The text describes this guy as impeccably tailored, total command of his language, just the absolute picture of corporate power.
hmm
But during coaching sessions, every single time he mentioned his board chairman, his left hand would reflexively move up to his throat, and he wasn't even aware he was doing it.
It was an entirely unconscious somatic response.
Right. And when the coach finally pointed it out to him, the CEO just froze. He sat there, and then he said, "He makes me feel like I cannot breathe."
That is the body speaking in its own language, revealing the truth of the conversational dynamic that his mind was trying to politely ignore.
It's heavy.
It is. And for you listening right now, it is really worth asking yourself, where does your body hold the sediment of your own unmetabolized conversations? Does your jaw tighten when a certain person's name pops up in your email inbox?
Or your shoulders creeping up.
Right. Do your shoulders rise toward your ears right before a specific weekly meeting? That is not just random muscle tension. That is the physical weight of conversations that have never truly been completed.
Which brings us to something that I think explains so much of human behavior. You see it in the book tied to this psychological principle from the early 1900s. A researcher noticed that waiters in cafes could remember incredibly complex orders perfectly. Who had the soup, who had the steak, no onions.
But then...
But the second the food was served and the bill was paid, they forgot the details entirely.
Yes, the Zeigarnik effect.
That's it, the Zeigarnik effect. The idea that unfinished tasks haunt our memory, while finished ones release us. And the author applies this directly to how we communicate. Unfinished conversations literally haunt us. They take up cognitive bandwidth.
They do, and often we don't even realize who we are actually having the unfinished conversation with. Hang's story from the book is a heartbreakingly common example of this.
It really is. Hang is this 60-year-old Taiwanese businessman. He is incredibly successful. He has the corner office with a view of the Taipei 101 Tower, but he physically cannot retire.
He keeps finding reasons to stay.
Every time he tries to step back, he invents a brand new corporate crisis that only he can solve. On the surface, if you looked at him, you'd just say, oh, he's a classic workaholic. He gets his entire identity from his company.
But the underlying truth was much more complex. Hang's father was a rural farmer who later turned into a factory worker, and he died long before Hang built this massive empire.
They never got to talk about it.
Exactly. They never had a real conversation about Hang's ambitions or what he was building. So Hang wasn't just a workaholic. Unconsciously, he was using every new factory, every international contract to try and finish an unfinishable conversation with his deceased father.
He was desperately trying to say, look at what I've done. Are you proud of me? Am I worth something?
Yes, he was stuck in a Zeigarnik loop, trying to complete a dialogue that could never actually happen in reality. And when we avoid the truth of what we are really trying to communicate, the cost is staggering.
Which perfectly explains the situation with the Malaysian family conglomerate mentioned in the sources. It wasted 5 entire years avoiding a strategic disagreement.
5 years is a long time in business.
It's an eternity. You have the patriarch who built the company's manufacturing arm with his bare hands 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And then you have his youngest son who is educated in London and wants to pivot the entire legacy company into tech.
And rather than sit down and have the difficult conversation about the future of the company and their family legacy, what did they do?
They spent half a decade avoiding it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, chronic avoidance is exactly like taking out a high-interest loan. It is a form of debt that accrues emotional and organizational interest every single day. For 5 years, this family engaged in what the author calls polite collusion.
Polite collusion. That is such a great phrase. It's when everyone agrees to pretend everything is fine.
Precisely. They developed elaborate organizational workarounds so the father and son never had to directly confront their radically different visions. They stopped making major decisions in full board meetings.
Just bypassing the conflict entirely.
Right. The son resorted to passive resistance, subtly delaying financial approvals for the father's manufacturing projects, and the collateral damage was huge. Talented new hires quit because the unspoken dysfunction in the office was so thick you could cut it with a knife.
5 years of that. The exhaustion must have been profound. But here is the kicker. When they finally secured a neutral facilitator, sat down in a boardroom in Kuala Lumpur, and actually named the elephant in the room. The actual conversation took 2 hours. 5 years of massive avoidance debt, cleared by a 2-hour conversation. And all they really did was finally admit that they were both just terrified of destroying the family's future.
Avoidance always feels like a solution in the short term because it preserves surface-level harmony. But it generates the exact conditions that make the aborted conversation even more dangerous and difficult to have later. It becomes 1,000 invisible weights piling up on everyone's shoulders.
Let's talk about those invisible weights. Because conversational sediment doesn't always happen in big, dramatic boardroom blowouts. Often it's the tiny, silent accumulation of slights, the 1,000 paper cuts of inattention. The book shares a story about a woman named Deepa, a tech director in Singapore.
A very telling example of systemic conversational dysfunction.
Deepa is brilliant, but she was really struggling to have any impact in senior leadership meetings. She would share a carefully researched, insightful idea, and the room's energy would just drop. Total silence.
No engagement at all.
Nothing. Then, 10 minutes later, a male colleague, let's call him Michael, would say the exact same thing, just with a bit more volume and a deeper voice, and suddenly the whole room is nodding and praising his genius.
It is a classic, deeply frustrating example of what philosophers call epistemic injustice.
Okay, wait. Epistemic injustice. What does epistemic mean in this context?
Epistemology is the study of knowledge. Epistemic injustice occurs when someone is wronged specifically in their capacity as a knower.
I see.
In Deepa's case, her contribution, her knowledge is rendered invisible or invalid by the group's biases until that exact same knowledge is amplified by someone with more perceived authority or the right demographic profile.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because of how Deepa reacted, she didn't get mad at the room. She didn't call out Michael for stealing her point.
No.
She went into the restroom after the meeting, looked at herself in the mirror, and blamed herself. She internalized that massive environmental failure as her own personal flaw. She decided in that moment that she just wasn't executive material.
And that is the true tragedy of chronic, invisible conversational weight. It seeps into your identity like groundwater. We adapt to these toxic conversational environments without even noticing we're doing it.
It just becomes normal to us.
Exactly. The 1,000 paper cuts didn't make Deepa bleed. They made her doubt that her own blood was red. She assumed she was the problem.
But structurally, what is actually happening in a room like that? How do incredibly smart executives fail to realize they aren't even having a real conversation?
Because they fall victim to the broadcast fallacy. This is the illusion that just because transmission occurred, communication actually happened.
Like thinking that sending an email means you've achieved alignment.
Exactly. Or you see it in big corporate all-hands meetings. The chief revenue officer gives a slide presentation, then the chief technology officer gives a completely different presentation. Everyone claps, but no ideas actually intersect.
They're just talking past each other.
It is just a series of parallel performances.
Yeah.
They're speaking at each other, but they are absolutely not speaking with each other.
But wait, isn't a broadcast sometimes necessary in a big company? You have to get the quarterly numbers out to 1,000 people somehow.
Oh, absolutely. Broadcasting data is a highly efficient, necessary tool for distributing information. The fallacy only occurs when leaders confuse that broadcast with actual conversational engagement. When you think you fostered collaboration just because you stood at a podium for 20 minutes, you are deceiving yourself.
And sometimes people think they're collaborating, but they're actually just hijacking the process. That brings up Xu Fen. She was a senior executive in Malaysia, and she suffered from what the book brilliantly calls the auteur's monologue.
A very dangerous trap for high performers.
Xu Fen was genuinely brilliant. Her brain just processed information so much faster than everyone else's. So when her team would bring her a new concept, she would listen for about 15 seconds before her brain raced ahead, found all the flaws, and immediately fixed them.
Doing the work for them.
Yeah. She would constantly interrupt her team with a yes and then proceed to completely rewrite their idea until it was unrecognizable.
And the irony is, she genuinely thought she was being highly collaborative, but she was turning collaboration into a solo performance. The auteur myth is this deeply ingrained belief that meaning flows from a single creative genius, and everyone else in the room is just an instrument to execute their vision.
By constantly improving her team's ideas, she was unknowingly teaching them to just stop triching.
Exactly. Why would her team expend the creative energy to build something if they know the idea is just going to be appropriated and overwritten by her anyway?
There's no point.
Without realizing it, Xu Fen created a brittle, fragile system that was totally dependent on her own presence. She completely atrophied the collective intelligence of her team.
So if winging it causes trauma and being the lone genius destroys your team, shouldn't we just use a proven, structured framework to guide our conversations? We have all these corporate tools now.
You would think so, but the text provides a profound challenge to our reliance on models. It introduces the competence paradox.
Can you walk us through that?
Certainly. Frameworks like the famous DRO model, which stands for goal, reality, options, will, and is used everywhere in executive coaching. They are incredibly useful as training wheels. But under the pressure of a real messy human interaction, these frameworks often transform into psychological defenses for the person using them.
So the framework isn't actually to help the other person.
Not always. Think about it. When a person sits across from you with a complex, irreducible human problem, the uncertainty of that moment is terrifying. Reaching for a rigid, step-by-step framework protects you from the anxiety of not knowing.
You just cling to the script.
It provides what we call epistemic security. But the moment you do that, you stop responding to the human being in front of you. You start processing them through your predetermined algorithm. You are trading genuine presence for the safety of a script.
It's the myth that there is a single best model for human interaction. The author uses this great analogy of hedgehogs versus foxes.
A concept originally from the philosopher Isaiah Berlin. The hedgehog knows one big thing, one grand theory, and applies it to everything. The fox knows many small things and adapts to the environment.
And the point is, human beings aren't hedgehog problems. We are fox realities. The author actually talks about experiencing severe culture shock when they tried to bring a very New York-style direct coaching framework to executives in Tokyo.
Oh, the Tokyo example is fascinating.
In New York, direct questions and rapid-fire answers are the ultimate sign of engagement. But in Tokyo, the author was met with long silences, indirect responses, deep emotional restraint.
And initially, operating as a hedgehog with one model, the author viewed those silences as a failure to engage. But that was a failure of the framework, not a failure of the client.
Right.
The executives in Tokyo were doing incredibly deep, profound work, but it was happening in the negative space of the conversation. If you try to force a fast-paced New York formula onto a contemplative Tokyo reality, you aren't communicating. You are colonizing the conversation.
Colonizing the conversation. That leads perfectly into one of the most beautiful metaphors in the entire source material. The author takes a walk through Arashiyama in Kyoto, Japan, and they contrast the idea of a formula with architecture.
It's a vital distinction.
A formula dictates exactly what you must do. If X happens, you must say Y. It completely eliminates all need for human judgment. Think about a rigid script during a performance review. It feels terrible for everyone. But architecture. The author looks at the Tukitsukyo Bridge, or the famous Sagano Bamboo Grove.
Think about the experience of walking through that bamboo grove. The path is clearly laid out. The towering green stalks define the edges of the space. But the architecture doesn't dictate whether you walk fast or slow.
You have choices.
Yes. It doesn't tell you whether you should take photos or if you should just close your eyes and listen to the wind and the leaves. It creates a beautiful, safe container for an experience without prescribing the exact outcome. A formula treats you as a machine operator following instructions. Architecture treats you as an artist inhabiting a space. This raises an important question for you listening right now. Are the structures you use in your daily life, your meeting agendas, your one-on-one formats, the way you talk to your kids, are they scripts that force people into tight little boxes? Or are they like the bamboo grove? Are you creating a container that allows for endless, unique human experiences?
I absolutely love that, because it requires us to let go of control, and that ties directly into the burden of speaking. Later in the book, the author visits Tainan, which is Taiwan's oldest city. It is described as a palimpsest. Now, a palimpsest is an old manuscript where the original writing has been scraped away so the parchment could be reused, but the faint traces of the old words still show through underneath.
A physical layering of history.
Right. In Tainan, you have the original indigenous Siraya people. Their oral history and culture were literally overwritten by successive waves of colonizers. The Dutch, then the Qing dynasty, then the Japanese. The author makes this incredible, haunting connection to our daily lives. That is exactly what we do when we cannot bear the silence in a conversation.
We colonize the silence with our own words.
Yes. We overwrite a person's fragile, emerging thoughts with our own loud, confident certainties just because we are uncomfortable with the pause.
We fill the emptiness because emptiness makes us anxious, but in doing so, we displace the wisdom that was trying to form in the other person. To master conversation, we have to learn to embrace the Japanese aesthetic of wabi-sabi.
Wabi-sabi. That is about finding beauty in imperfection, right?
Finding beauty in the incomplete, the imperfect, and the not yet known. The text shares a very powerful story of Mei Zen, a highly polished, incredibly capable CEO. Her leadership team was completely stuck in a strategic loop. Everyone was just performing their competence, quoting data at each other, and getting absolutely nowhere.
It's that mask of knowing again.
Exactly. Finally, she put her pen down on the table, took a breath, and asked her team for permission to share a messy, half-formed thought.
She literally asked for permission to be incomplete in front of her subordinates.
She did, and by offering her unpolished wabi-sabi thought, she instantly lifted the burden of perfection from the entire room. She didn't deliver a final conclusion that only invited them to agree or disagree. She offered a partial thought that invited genuine co-creation. Suddenly, the whole team felt safe enough to start sharing their own incomplete ideas. The posturing stopped, and real strategic movement finally began.
It is like what the author says about conversational restraint. Holding back is actually a deeply creative act. Think about the jazz of Miles Davis. His absolute genius wasn't just in the incredible notes he played on the trumpet. It was the power of the notes he didn't play.
The space between.
Yes. He understood that the real emotion of the music lives in the silence between the notes. As a leader, a manager, or just a friend, sitting across a coffee table, holding back your own brilliant insight so the other person has the space to discover it themselves, that is the ultimate act of conversational mastery.
It is the immense discipline of knowing when not to move the brush.
So what does this all mean? If we distill everything from this incredible deep dive into the source material, conversational mastery is not about having the perfect framework memorized. It is not about always knowing the exact right thing to say to sound like the smartest person in the room. It is about fundamentally shifting your mindset from a transactional exchange of data to genuine meaning-making. It is having the courage to embrace the uncomfortable silence, to hold your corporate frameworks lightly, and to truly deeply meet the human being sitting across from you without hiding behind a mask of knowing.
And I will leave you with this final thought to mull over as you go about your day. We've talked about how meaning isn't just exchanged like an email. It is forged in what philosophers call the intersubjective space, a kind of cognitive commons where thinking becomes a collective act. If every conversation you have leaves an invisible physical and emotional sediment, and every silence you nervously fill overwrites someone else's fragile discovery, what kind of psychological architecture are you unknowingly building in the minds of the people you will speak to tomorrow? Are you building rigid, formulaic fortresses that keep them trapped? Or are you designing open bamboo grove courtyards that give them the space to finally breathe, be incomplete, and discover their own truth?
That is a profound question worth carrying with you into your next meeting or your next dinner with your family. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We genuinely hope it changes the way you look at every conversation you have from here on out. Until next time, keep listening and keep learning.